Hello and welcome to Nerdarchy, for nerds by nerds. I am hanging out with Dr. Megan today. How are you doing?
I'm doing awesome. How are you?
Good. We chatted a couple years ago when we were doing the live
Mhm.
chats before, so it's so nice to have you back. I found then what you were doing fascinating, and I still do. Using games to help people with that need help, which is awesome. To see our hobby, like we've always like jokingly talked about some of our friends using this as their therapy. But you're actually doing that.
Yeah.
So you want to give us a quick like what you do for people that are not familiar?
Yeah, sure. So I'm a psychologist. I practice out of Charlotte, North Carolina, but with telehealth and getting to see people in other states. I'm also licensed in Virginia and Washington and working on getting a ability to practice in some other states. So I do a lot of virtual practice. I'm the co-founder of a company called Geeks Like Us, where we make geek content and create a geek community focused on all facets of geekdom. And then I DM a live play D&D show called Clinical Role through Geeks Like Us. And then I'm also a therapeutic dungeon master where I use D&D as a medium for therapy with specifically with girls and people genetically born female.
So D&D is therapy and RPGs as therapies is seems to be like really kind of taking off and
Yeah.
expanding. So what is it about RPGs and D&D that make them such good vehicles or tools?
Well, I think when we're talking about therapy and wanting to work on our issues, one of the things that gets in our way are our own defense mechanisms. It's natural for you to have a good, strong sense of ego and not to want to admit your faults and your flaws. And because therapy is about helping us grow through our faults and flaws, it can be really difficult for us to face those things. And so, what role playing games do is they give us this ability to confront our faults and flaws in a ways that's not ours. It's not that I have a hard time trusting other people. My character has a hard time trusting other people. And through helping your character learn and grow, it can help teach you to learn and grow. I kind of think of it as coming at your issues sideways.
Is it a more directed form of the game in the sense that like here are things to portray because I want this person to work through these things, or is it just like a regular D&D game, but then you kind of have to hit them from sideways with these different things to kind of get them to work through it?
Yeah, it's a little of both. When I first started running these groups, it was very meticulously planned out. I had different story beats planned, guests coming in to help, facilitate discussions around really important, heavy hitting issues. Then my life as a dungeon master was forever changed by reading Mike Shea's book, The Lazy Dungeon Master and The Lazy Dungeon Master Returns. Thank you so much for those books.
He's gotten a
And
lot of us like that.
oh my gosh, reading through it and just going, "Oh my gosh, this is brilliant," and I'm seeing all my flaws in how I do this and why it's sucking the fun of the game out for me, and so, I started planning a lot less, and so while it's not so much of, say, like, we've got player 2 who really wants to confront their ability to trust and player 1 who wants to learn emotional regulation, I might be putting in opportunities for them to work on those skills, but more I'm trying to see where in the game does that naturally come up, and then how can I kind of feed and push into that. Um, it's been really interesting because being more flexible like that, I think having that therapist hat on and DM hat, like it's a lot more work, but in a really good way of it's helping me pay attention and really think about I know this person's working on this thing, this person's working on this thing. Look at this choice the group just made. What an opportunity for this person to really have to confront that and to talk about that. And so I think in that way, the game's gotten a lot better. And I think if you were from the outside watching most of how we play, it would look like just a regular game of D&D. Um, the difference comes when we are doing face-to-face games. Every now and then, I put the dungeon master screen down and we process what's going on and we talk about it. That's where the difference really was coming in. I don't
Okay.
know what the I'm going to do for that when I'm doing my virtual games because I'm running all my games online now.
Yeah.
Uh, to have that nice symbol of like we are on pause from the games. I'll think about that. But
I
yeah,
don't know. Use
that's
a green
basically it.
screen and change your background. I don't know.
That might be it. Yeah, I could change the background to like some stars. Like, okay, now we're in process mode.
So do people when people come to you for therapy, do they know they're going to be playing D&D, or and that's why they come to you, or is it like basically mostly like your normal clientele and you're like surprise D&D?
Oh no, I don't pull it on anybody as a surprise. So you have to sign up for my groups. It's not. I also do individual therapy, and a lot of my individual clients, we never talk about D&D or gaming or anything. Other ones come to me because they identify as geeks or nerds, and they really love gaming, and they want to have somebody to talk about that stuff with. My office, which this is my home office that I'm in, so I have minis and stuff, but my office at my work has a ton of pop figs with all the different fandoms I am a part of, and lots of posters of Marvel comics and lots of D&D posters. It's people come in there, look around, if they go, oh, you treat lots of children. I'm like, oh, I don't know if we're gonna work. But
Yeah.
then when I have people come in and go, oh, this is so amazing. I'm like, all right,
Yeah.
cool, we got this. We're gonna we're gonna be fine.
Have you had any forever DMs try and sneak into your forever session or into your sessions to find games?
A couple of people, but when it's an interesting thing. So because I'm running therapeutic games, we are working on therapeutic themes, and they're not free. There is a cost
Mm.
associated with it. So I have somebody who's looking more for just a game to play. I'll try to point them in directions of good places to find good games and good groups to play with. But I certainly have had a few people who have come and said, like, I want to learn, but I don't feel safe going to a game store, back before COVID, of course, and asking to learn. Like, my groups are all again for people who are identified female at birth and or identify as female currently, and there's still a lot of discrimination and sexism that can happen in the game stores. Like, it's going down significantly. I think every year it gets a little better, but there is still that barrier. And so to know that they can come to a place where they're not going to be judged for not knowing the rules yet, that they can be themselves, they can be goofy and just relax and not have to worry about any of this stuff, has a really big benefit as well. And then also you can make some friends and have fun.
I'm always kind of fascinated when I run into um, a woman gamer who's closer to my age and got started, but because I know it was a very different experience. I mean, even just
Yeah.
gaming back then was a very different experience than it is now. And also, we were terrible in the '80s for the most part to everybody, so there was that
Yeah.
too.
Yeah. Yeah.
And like now, you can go to a game store and kind of learn to play. But when we started, there were no game stores. Like most of my gear would come from like a Walden Books or B Dalton, and I don't think
Hmm.
either of those things exist anymore.
Yeah. All those things have kind of fall into the wayside of with the internet.
Yeah, I think like in our town, we had like a comic book store that had like one rack of like gaming
Hmm.
stuff, and
But I didn't
also
even,
that place was terrible to go to for anybody. But
yeah.
I could see how it would be intimidating for a woman to walk in there. Most of them were like dark and dingy, and then
Hmm.
when we finally got one in like the town over, that was like, and it's decades later. I mean, I was an adult by then. That was open and bright, and it's like anybody would have come in there. Like my father-in-law, definitely not a geek or gamer, would do raffles and stuff and go to different businesses, and like he actually enjoyed going to that place. So
Hmm.
now we're finally getting like more welcoming spaces. Well, we were, and then the
Yeah. And then
apocalypse.
COVID. Yes. Yeah. Everything that's going on now. Now, I think that's a really interesting thing of like this idea of, those of us who grew up in the 80s and grew up with video games and more tabletop games and everything, becoming, in our middle ages now, like, yay, that milestone.
Yeah.
um, and we want to be able to go out and have these experiences and share them. And so, like, to see things like the barcades that are, or were popping up across the country again. We don't know what's going to happen in the future, but then also seeing like the board game cafes that are coming around, on top of more gaming stores and people doing things. It's just wonderful to see how much this is growing and the importance of gaming. I've been one of the things I've been doing since the last time we spoke is I've actually been writing, which this was its own nightmare for me. But, and part of the writing is doing a lot of research and just finding time and time again that studies are showing us the importance of play, and that we need to have that outlet. We need to have fun. And finding these ways for people to have fun and to connect with other people is just, it's not a luxury, it's a necessity.
So, in which space have you been doing the writing?
So I've been writing for, I wrote a, or co-authored a chapter for Press Start, which is edited by Dr. Rachel Cohort on her studies of video game therapy. I also have a co-authored chapter in the upcoming Geek Therapy book from Leyline Publishing. And I feel like there was another one in there. I've been working on my own book. I need to finish it.
What are you writing, if you don't mind me
I'm
asking?
writing the so the style of therapy I use is called acceptance and commitment therapy, or abbreviated to ACT. And so I'm talking about how I use D&D with the ACT lens, and talking through the different principles of ACT and how you apply them to gaming and to D&D and how it can be used therapeutically in that way.
So, how long have you been using D&D in your therapy sessions?
Just over 3 years. I think we're getting ready to come up on the 4th year. So January will be a full 3 years going into the 4th.
Is that becoming more common in your industry for people to fall back on games as a ways of facilitating therapy?
I think so. People are getting more and more interested. Myself and Dr. Boca Mazzaro of Take This, we co-authored a training on the applied use of tabletop role-playing games. We've taught it 2 times now. The second one was a webinar format. I think we had 40 people attending. I do case consults now where I consult with other professionals who are wanting to use D&D therapeutically. I've gotten to talk with lots of people who are doing research around it, which is awesome. I want to see more research being done on, I anecdotally see the effect that this has with my clients, but we need some data to be able to show, like, yes, this is a helpful form of therapy. This can really reach people in a way that something else can't.
Yeah, without data, it's not really science, right?
Exactly.
So,
Yeah, it's just kind of some cool stories, which
yeah,
we're all nerds. We love stories, like,
yeah.
but stories aren't enough.
So, Brian has a question: how well
Mhm.
does D&D 5e deal with handle that stuff, or are other systems structured better to get into constructive RP?
I think any system can get into constructive RP. It's the reason I use D&D 5e is because it's the system I know and it is the most widely played system. I want people that I work with to learn a system that they can utilize as a method to make social connections if they move places. You know, maybe so like Outbreak Undead can really have some amazing conversations about preparedness, the importance of physical fitness, having a plan, learning how to trust people and rely on other people. Like, there's a
S-
lot of really good stuff in
having
there.
having slower friends, maybe.
Yeah, challenges with that, and like why it's important to take care of yourself. But going to a new location, so say one of my clients goes to college and they're looking for people to play Outbreak Undead with, they don't feel comfortable running the game yet, they're gonna probably have a hard time doing that. But if you go playing D&D, it's gonna be a lot easier to find people who are gonna play. A lot of colleges might even have like clubs for D&D and things. So it's not that other systems are not appropriate for this content. Heck, a psychologist even developed this system called Emberwind. Is that right? I think so. And it's actually like the character building process is sort of designed to mimic almost a personality test. And it is a fascinating system. It is super fun. A friend of mine ran it for me a few weeks ago, and it's a great system. But again, it's just that thing of I want to have a system, one that I am incredibly familiar with. I have behind me, I have a whole shelf of RPG books, and I have very many systems there, but I have not really read or gotten a deep dive into many of them just because I don't have the time. And so I know 5e, and so that's why I use it. It's not that it's the best.
Well, that makes sense too, and also the recognition of if people want to continue on afterwards, like you said, finding a game is can be more difficult if you use something that's a little more obscure.
Mhm.
And right now, D&D is the elephant in the room. Even people that don't game kind of they have an idea what it is, whether that's a correct idea or not. But at
Yeah.
least there's like brand recognition.
Mhm.
So Joe wants to know: have you worked with PTSD clients? How well does it help?
I have not yet. I really want to start a PTSD group. I'm a former Army, so I've worked a lot with combat PTSD. One of my colleagues out at Game to Grow, Elizabeth Kilmer, she has run trauma groups using D&D. So I really want to, I think it will be an incredibly powerful tool, but that's just my hypothesis right now.
So switching gears a little bit, you've been running a stream. You DM a stream over on Twitch, Clinical Role,
Yes.
with the what is it? The Geek brand. I'm sorry, my
Geeks
brain.
like us.
Geeks like us brand, and that's been going on for quite some time.
Yeah. We started in, I think, November of 2017.
Yeah. So we were talking a little bit before we went live, and you said they're like 10th, 12th level or so.
Yeah. They're 10th. I think they're 10th level. We're getting ready to go to 11th.
And we were kind of discussing whether or not you're going to take them all the way to 20 or not, or
Mm-hmm.
do something else. So we've taken like 2 campaigns to 20th level now, and they were both 5e, and it took us like gaming for over 20, 30 years to ever make that happen. So what have your players expressed interest in going all the way, or are they getting bored with the characters?
No, they're all really enjoying it. With Clinical Role, so there are so many live play D&D games now. It's kind of hard to stand out. And so one of the things we're doing, like, so all my players are psychologists or therapeutic dungeon masters. So we bring psychology and knowledge of behavior to the gaming table. So it's something that makes us a little different. When I do my prep for the games, though, in my, again, Sly Flourish lazy dungeon master prep method,
Uh-huh.
instead of having a full like story written out, because I cannot predict what these players will do. It's been 3 years. I still can't. I have emotional growth points for them. I have 5 players, so it's kind of hard to hit all 5 growth points. So typically it's 1 or 2 are the primary and everybody else is trying to figure out how they fit in. But it's creating this situation where, like, if I have a player who's trying to understand that other people need them, right? I might highlight, like, your character is noticing this person's kind of falling apart, or this person is like, wow, my friends really need me. And so that's one of the things that has been really fun is I think and my players would have to speak to this. I think it stops it from feeling stale, is that we're always kind of pushing that emotional growth, not letting them kind of sit in misery for too long or sit in discomfort, but it's putting difficult choices before them. Dr. Coert is one of my players. This is the first time she's ever played D&D, and she is a big time video gamer, so she's much more used to like kind of the linear quest progressions and things. And it's been really interesting too, because one of the things I'm doing with playing is kind of lifting behind the screen a little bit, because as she's presented with options, I am maybe stepping out of line as a DM from some people's perspective, but I am saying, like, you don't have to do this. She's those who have not watched the show, she's a water genasi, and the genasi that was, or the djinn that was her patron for the family, essentially is trapped and wants her to free them. And so of course it's doing what a djinn does, which is offering lots of power and cool things if she comes and sets him free. Right? But like, she's been slowly kind of figuring out that genies maybe aren't the most reliable people. Maybe they're not good. And what
Slightly
does that mean?
manipulative.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, I see what you're saying, because I've done that with new players as well, because you just don't want them to feel like they have to do this thing just because you presented it.
Yeah.
And just been like, hey, this is just one option. You can choose to do whatever you want. It's really fun to see like a new player when they finally get like, oh, I can do whatever I want with this game.
Yeah.
And the wheels kind of like fly off.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It is always fun. Like, for the people who are used to video gaming, that idea of like, there is no limit on what I can do whatever I want. But then also for teaching theory of mind, I work with a lot of autism kids. And so learning, like, I do what my character wants, not what I want. Like, I love video game RPGs. I think that, like, the Elder Scrolls is super fun, except I get overwhelmed by all the side quests and have to quit, then restart and vow that I will not talk to any NPCs, and then a few weeks later quit again. It's so limiting, and like, there's so many times where I'm like, why am I having my character go on this quest? It makes no sense. They just killed a dragon and ate a bunch of cheese. They're probably tired. They would want to go sleep the night, not go hunt vampires right now. But, you know.
Well, it makes sense. So TJ wants to know, has any research or articles been published with the use of tabletop RPGs in psychology?
Not recently. There are some. It's been frustrating. There's newer stuff happening, but no formal studies have been done. Bohana Group's just getting approval for some research studies. I think Game to Grow is also working on collecting data to do publication. I've been in contact with people in the University of Florida, out Sweden, England, and Australia also are all currently running studies. They just haven't been published yet. There have been some anecdotal stories and studies published, but again, those are usually a very, very small sample size, and so you have to be really careful and cautious with the results you take from that.
So generally, how long does a study like that take?
5 years.
Okay. So, soon we'll know something soon.
Yeah, well, and it takes so long because you have to come up with your study, you have to go through the IRB approval. My business partner and I actually had wanted to do a study ourselves, but to do an IRB outside of a university costs at minimum $5,000, and usually you have to go through the IRB process several times.
Yeah.
And then you go through and you collect all your data, data collection can take up to a year, if not more,
Can you
depending on how many
kickstart that?
people. It'd be cool. They're probably ethically no, we couldn't, but that'd be an interesting idea, kickstarting research.
Yeah.
That could be a new thing.
It's a GoFundMe. Definitely a
Yeah.
GoFundMe, if not a Kickstarter.
Yeah. But yeah, you do collect the data, and then you have to analyze the data, then you have to write it all up, write up your summary, and then the other challenging thing is getting it published. A little again, pulling back of academia and publishing in journals, you're only allowed to submit to one journal until you get the acceptance or rejection. And
Mm.
then once the journal accepts it, they're under no obligation to publish it in a timely manner.
Yuck.
So yeah, yeah. And like you want to get in a peer reviewed journal because that's more prestigious and more people will see it and
Mhm.
utilize that as a citation. So it's a long process.
It sounds like it.
Yes, and you get no money for publishing.
Yeah.
That I read a sweet story on I think it might have been on Twitter, someone was writing, "My aunt just said that she paid the $6 to get my study that got published in this journal so that I could get some money for all my hard work. I don't have the heart to tell her I don't get nothing."
Well, she's supporting a good cause at least.
Yeah, yeah. It's just hard. Like there's
Yes.
a lot of steps and a lot of bottlenecks, and like when you're doing something that's seen as more niche work, like gaming studies,
Mhm.
there aren't as many people out there who understand what it is, and we people who tend to be on the approvals listings for a lot of these journals are older people who are more established in their careers because again, being an editor, being somebody who reviews these articles is also unpaid. And so it's someone who has the ability to volunteer their time to do these things. And if they don't understand games or gaming studies, they don't know what they're reading
Wait,
really.
wait a minute. What does
So
this $5,000 go towards?
the people who are on the IRB, they get paid for being on an IRB. But the publishers don't. A lot of it is unpaid work.
This just sounds like the worst pyramid scam ever.
It's bizarre. When I was in grad school, I always thought my textbooks cost so much money because they had to pay all of the people who contributed chapters.
Uh-huh.
Nope, nope. Even the editors don't really make any money. That's publication is, I guess, where to be if you.
Yeah. Sell the picks and shovels. So,
Yes.
Cameron wants to know: are there things we as DMs can do to help establish the table's trust with one another?
Yes, do session 0. Do session 0. Also, Monty Cook released a free PDF called Consent in Gaming. It is absolutely fabulous. It came out about the time Dr. B and I were very close to finishing up our training. And we had been talking about like, oh, we should probably write something up about what a good session 0 looks like, all the different things you should include, why it's important. And then this came out and we're like, cool, we could not have done this better. So
Yeah.
use this. It talks about like, I think a lot of people have pushback against this idea of using consent checklists for their games and things because I think we feel like this is somehow people infringing on our rights to play the game we want to play. And that's not what it's about. It's if you're sitting down and playing a game with your friends, you want your friends to have fun. And you don't want to bring up trauma and you don't want them to feel alienated or isolated and it hurt in a way. Or like you don't want them to have this really big embarrassing moment that's going to cause some damage within the friendship. So like if you've got one of your friends who has a phobia of snakes and has a panic attack anytime we even talk about snakes, and you have some sort of big purple worm encounter in there, they're not going to enjoy that, right? And so by getting consent, we know these things so that way we don't accidentally hurt somebody at our table.
Yeah, I mean, you don't know what people have been through. Even if you
Mhm.
know that, you could have known them all your life, and you still might not know everything they've been through. And I think it's also really great. You a lot of times you're at a table with people who don't know each other. So you just don't know. They're good tools. The different safety tools out there.
Mhm.
Um, is a great concept. It's a lot newer for me because I've been playing so long.
Yeah.
And with like the same people. But like I definitely can see the value, and we are huge proponents of session zero and social contracts, and and even still, like we've only really started implementing session zeros when fifth 5e came out, and we started like
Yeah.
poking around online more, because like our group kind of like lived in a bubble for a very long time.
Mhm.
uh, uh you know but sometimes old dogs can learn some new tricks, and even we're learning things that we're doing wrong, right? As we implement these things, like we had a session zero for a game we're currently running, and you know we started with like kind of like the characters and backstory instead of the social elements,
Mhm.
which was definitely a mistake and reversed. And I was the guilty party for putting something in a backstory, and I was like, oh, after we started moving into more of the social contract elements, going, hey, I guess we should have did this part first.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But, like, it's okay to do stuff wrong as long as we learn from it, right? And, like, there's this fear that we have of acknowledging our mistakes, which I think really weakens us because it's like we're not willing to say, "I was wrong, and that was a mistake, and I'm sorry," and I think that's a really big problem too, and, like, that's something we have to be willing to do, and, like, again, talking through stuff at session 0 is really helpful, and also repeat session 0. Every 6 months or so, check in and just make sure it doesn't have to be a big thing, it can just be a 10-minute thing. Um, a couple of quick recommendations too, like, Lauren Urban, who she's the community manager for D&D Beyond, had this wonderful quote that, like, "Just because I know the roller coaster passed its safety inspection doesn't mean I'm gonna enjoy the ride any less." And because I think some dungeon masters have this fear of like, "Oh, if I let my players know what's gonna happen, it's gonna ruin the element of surprise."
Hmm.
And it doesn't. Like, I ran a game where it was actually a clinical role. They were escaping the Underdark, and I made it a series of skill challenges, and it was them and 20 some odd NPCs that they were saving. And before we went live with this, I told them, like, "Tonight, NPCs are going to die." Like that even if you do like, unless you statistically do this completely perfectly, which is completely improbable, NPCs are going to die tonight. Are you all in a place for that to happen, or would you like me to adjust the story? I am okay with adjusting the story. And they all said it was okay, and so we had it happen, and they did well. They only ended up losing 2 NPCs. It was still hard for them. You could tell they were still like, like it really hit them
Sure.
hard, but they knew that it was gonna happen. They knew it was a risk, and so then afterwards, I checked in and was like, "Is that okay with everybody?" Was how we handled that appropriate. And it was fine, and it was good, and, like, that's doing those things as a dungeon master builds trust. Um, one of the worst things you can do is say that you're gonna do something and then not do it or not utilize it, because then it shows that you're being a hypocrite. Like, so in therapy, we talk about therapy homework a lot. Anybody who has ever worked with me as a client knows I'm a fan of therapy homework because I tell people I am not magic. Like, hanging out with me does not create change in your life. It's about doing things outside of therapy. Here's the deal, though: therapy homework is only effective if the therapist checks in on it. If I forget to check in on the homework, I have just communicated to my client that it does not matter and they do not need to do it. And so we need to check in and follow through with the things that we say that we're going to do. If we at the start of the game, say before major things that could be emotionally heavy happen, I'm going to check in with the table real quick to make sure it's okay. And then if something happens and we forget, the trust goes down. And it's going to take a lot to earn that trust back.
So, again, like, more recently, we've started playing with a lot of different people and just expanding, kind of just trying to expand our friend group and our game groups, and like that's why we have to like constantly revisit these things and learn new things. And I feel like even if you've been gaming for a long time and you have like, you're lucky enough to have the same group that you game with, it really is good to get out there and experience other groups and other people, but at the same time you have to like take these things into consideration. Like I know that I've had friends who like just hate the idea of a session zero because they're like, oh well, we're so busy and it's so hard to get people together. The idea of taking a session to not play the game,
Yeah.
it just like really goes against everything that they want to do. What would you say to the people that kind of have that mindset?
It's prevention and also a commitment. So look, if I have I have the honor of playing in a Curse of Strahd campaign right now, and I'm saying honor because I've wanted to play Curse of Strahd since it came out, and I'm finally getting to play in it. And our DM held a session zero, and I was so appreciative of it because they carved out the time and ensured everybody else carved out the time, and we talked about those things, and we revisit stuff from it every now and then and just check in. And because I know that they're committed to that and they're creating this environment and what we said matters and it holds weight, I know I'm going to have more fun. And so I'm going to up the priority of it. Like I've had a few different things that are supposed to happen on Friday nights, and I feel like, nope, we need to reschedule because I've got a game. I am not going to cut out this game where I know my DM has taken time to make it a fun game and an inviting place for me versus this other thing. And so I think if we do a session zero, it can help people feel like that there can be more fun and more enjoyment. And so I think it will increase the likelihood of commitment to the game.
One of the things that like I kind of like learned recently too was by doing a session zero, and someone had this one thing in it which I was like, oh, well, I would have never even thought of that. I don't know that would have ever came up, but it kind of challenged me as a DM to think of other ways to do things. Like a player is like, well, violence against cows would bother me. That's a sacred animal, to me in my culture. And I'm like, oh, okay. I'm not sure that would have came up, but and then I got me thinking. I was like, does that apply to minotaurs too?
Yeah.
And then I'm like, well, I can totally make up a new monster now. That would take the place of a minotaur.
Yeah, like make it a boar instead or something, right?
Yeah. So it's just in new ways to kind of like challenge ourselves with these things. And so the game that we're running is it's all like reptilian races. So I want to do like a rhinoceros iguana version of a minotaur, I think.
Oh, cool.
So yeah, so I think as DMs or individuals, instead of taking these things and looking at them and seeing obstructions to the game we want to run, why not just use them as springboards to more creativity?
And I think like in the era of COVID and all of the stress that we're under right now, it's a really good idea when you sit down with your group just to do a check-in. There's the spoon theory of like, how many spoons do you have? I prefer to go at the D&D method of how are your spell slots looking today? And if we don't have a lot of energy left, it might be like, okay, I was going to have this really heavy hitting emotional thing happen tonight, but my players are all burned out and I'm going to do harm to them if I do this. So instead, all of a sudden, here's a million goblins that you have to fight. It's like, where do they come from? Don't worry about it. They're just here. And this is what we're doing right now.
Yeah. So Brian has a question. If a DM puts a player in a spot they're not comfortable with, maybe forgetting this the step of talking about X topics, is there any way for the GM to repair that trust?
I think there's always ways. It takes time though. So one of the things that I've done through Geeks Like Us is I have a series called Psychology at the Table. I'm on a hiatus from it, not because I don't have ideas, but because I'm terrible at video editing. But I do have a video on there on how to say you're sorry, how to apologize. And it's hard to apologize because most of us want to have qualifiers, right? Or we want to say, I'm sorry you took it that way. That is so not an apology, right? Learning how to say you're sorry, I think, is the very first step in it. Asking for forgiveness and asking to learn. Is there anything I can do to make it up? Is there any resource you would like me to read? Are there ways that I can start working to help earn your trust back? I've been wanting to do a follow-up video on forgiveness, but boy, that one's a really hard topic because there is a lot about power dynamics in that. And something to understand is even though D&D or any other tabletop role-playing game is a game, there is a power differential between GM and player, where the GM holds more power than the player. And it can, when you have less power than the person you're talking to, like when you're the powerful person saying you're sorry, there's a sort of social obligation for the less powerful person to accept the apology, even if they don't want to. And so trying to diffuse that power differential as much as possible to make it okay for them to step away and do what they need to repair and build trust back up. My husband actually came up with this analogy and it's brilliant. I wish I had come up with it, but he did it. If you think of trust like a plate, when you break it, you have to glue it back together and it takes a lot of time. You can glue it back together and get a plate again, but it breaks a lot more easily now. And if it breaks too many times, you're going to hit a point where it can't get put back together.
So there's another question kind of along these lines. If someone was dead against filling out a consent form, should I assume they have baggage and just leave it alone, or should I talk to them through it gently and assume it's the former?
I would always talk it through. I think we run into problems by making assumptions. There's that little pithy saying of, assume makes an ass of you and me.
Yeah. I mean, most things can be circumnavigated with communication. Mm-hmm. And then if they then don't want to communicate, then, there's nothing you can do about that.
Yeah. And then like you get a choice too. Like, I think one of the things we have to remember too is sometimes things let us know which people don't need to be in our circles. Right. So like if I'm working with somebody and they are refusing to have a game where something that is one of my hard lines is going to be in that game, no matter what I say, I don't want to play with them. Like, that's cool. Go run your game, but I'm not going to be a part of it. And that's not like a threat or anything. Like, go do you, I'm going to do me. And figuring out like, if I have a player who's uncommunicative, already kind of stirring the pot before even session 0 happens, are they a player I want to have in my game? And if they're not, then that's okay. There's another game out there for them.
Yeah, I mean, I even break it down to like, is this a person I want to be friends with? Like, mm-hmm. And if the answer is no, then I probably shouldn't want to play with them either.
Yeah.
And that comes up often. It's like when we get a lot of like weird questions, and I've said it on here so many times. It's just like, I wonder who people are playing these games with. And like my thing is always like, well, you should try and play these games with someone who is either your friends or you would want to be friends with.
Yeah. Yeah. And like, look, if you're at a convention and they're not wanting to fill out a 10-page, consent form, I can kind of understand that because that's a lot. Right. But, yeah. Most consent forms are 1 to 2 pages at most. And that can be really helpful. I think too, just a quick thing at conventions, have like a movie box summary of your adventure with a rating system on it. And that can really help people self-select if they want to be at your table or not.
That makes a lot of sense as well. And I imagine at some point we'll probably see like a uniform version of that, as the mm-hmm. industry grows, as, conventions get better and people just get better at recognizing the importance of this stuff, in these social situations so that everyone can have the best experience possible.
Yeah.
So how much longer do you think Clinical Role will go on for? Your first season is, basically 3 years.
Well, it's been so long because we've been fairly inconsistent. So when we started, we were playing once a month. Then we started doing twice a month, but with conventions and everything, that was very spotty. It would have been 26 games a year if we'd been able to keep it up, but we were probably averaging maybe 15. Yeah. And of those, a lot were one-offs. But this year, thanks to COVID, we've been very consistent. I think we'll probably year and a half of the current campaign. My thought, oh, this will be the first time I'm publicly saying this. My thought for the next iteration of Clinical Role is a Western Marshes style, because I have a lot more friends and other therapeutic dungeon masters who want to join. But I can't have 20 players all at once. That's too many.
Yeah.
So I'm slowly working on setting up what the adventure is going to look like for a collection. It'll probably be close to 40 players who are all connected to something, and then that we'll split off, 3 at a time, 4 at a time, and do, 2 to 3 adventure, 2 to 3 game adventures, and then they go back and new players come out. So that's my plan for the next round.
That was going to be my next question too. Where you think you'll go next? That'll also probably help with a lot of the inconsistencies of trying to
Yeah.
get this one group together all the time.
Yeah, it's really hard to do. It's just, the truth of being an adult and also being busy and very focused, is we all have a lot going on. And, we also have kids and their schedules and spouses who want to see us sometimes. And so there's just a lot.
Needy families.
Yeah, families, they want our attention all the time.
Do you have a favorite moment from that campaign?
Ooh, I have a few. Um, I almost made Dr. B cry on camera on stream. That was fun. um, there's been a couple of favorite moments. So when I first started doing the emotional growth points, I checked in with one of my players about the last game, and because they don't know what their emotional growth point is each game either. And so I asked him what he thought it was, and he got it exactly. And so as a DM, there was this really big rewarding moment of like, I got it. I'm figuring it out. I think oh gosh, also with the same players, this is Adam Johns. He was saying how he wanted this one thing for his player. So his backstory is they're from this clan called the Moonfang clan, and they worship a wolf god. And he was saying how he wanted his wolf forms to get more powerful because he could be a wolf or a dire wolf, and that's kind of it. He's like, I want a more powerful wolf as I level up. I'm like, okay, all right. But I had already planned something. It was a magic item that he was actually going to find in the Underdark. And I was like, yes, I had just finished making it. And I was like, yeah, I anticipated his needs. That was so cool. I think there was a sweet moment too between Dr. Coert's character and Adam Davis's character, where they were both kind of talking about how they felt adrift and they didn't quite know what was going on. And so Adam Davis's character Gragnold made a friendship bracelet for Rachel's character, and like they both communicate that that's probably one of the most touching moments in the game for them. And then for the most ridiculous memory, Kenta Adam Davis, he has the Dawnbringer sword, which is a sentient weapon that he calls Dawn, and has been teaching him how to read and do other things. And his barbarian doesn't always get what's going on, and so Dawn whispers stuff in his ear. He's worried about Dawn spending the rest of her existence alone. So he has been on a quest to find another sentient sword that she can be with forever. And so he goes to magic shops with his sword and always has tried to play matchmaker with his sword. And he came up with this idea of an application called Whetstone for sentient weapons to find love. So I think that's another favorite.
As you said earlier, you just don't know what your group's going to do.
I don't.
So you have mentioned several times emotional growth points, and that's kind of what you focus on for your game. What is that, and how might a DM implement that as opposed to something more traditional, what they're used to?
Yeah, so instead of like looking at XP or items, it's going like, where do we want this character to grow? I think one of the characters who's had the most emotional growth is Emerald, or Dr. B's character, who started off as this very kind of persnickety, like, I don't need anybody, screw y'all, I'm on my own. And so his emotional growth points have been like, how can I get him to care more about the people he's with? How can I get him to see not just I am able to stay alive a little bit better with a barbarian watching my back, into turning that into, these are my friends and I just want my friends around. And I want to be connected with them. And like, one of the things is Emerald has had a very fixed idea of what his story is and what's going on with it. And so he's just like, nope, this is the way of the world, this is how it is. And so emotionally, to get him to open up and to expand out that things could be different. And so it's like, how do we erode away those fundamental thoughts? Like, the moment I mentioned where he got choked up on stream was, his character is an elf who was raised in a human orphanage. And he did the beautiful thing, that I love when players do this, left it open to the DM to decide how that happened. And so his interpretation of the orphanage was that it was a terrible, awful place. Well, of course, as a kid, it's a terrible, awful place. But when you go and you look back at something with adult eyes, it changes it. And so he got a chance in the game to go back to the orphanage and see it with adult eyes. And what I made different about this orphanage was that you couldn't just drop kids off here. You had to actually pay an entrance fee for your child to be there. It was 50 gold pieces. So for your average person, that is a lot of money. And one of the requirements they had was that the family who was leaving the child there had to leave a letter for them that they would get upon their leaving the orphanage. And so when they got to be 11 or 12, they went into an apprenticeship, and then from apprenticeship they became a tradesperson. And so it was this great way to kind of scaffold them into a better future. And so his family left him there in the hopes that it would give him a better future. And so but in his backstory, he ran away from the orphanage before he started his apprenticeship. So he didn't know any of that.
Oh, that's great.
And so he came back 60 years later and got the letter and found out what had happened with his family. And it was this whole big shift of the world isn't what I thought it was. And then in that moment of emotional vulnerability, he had the other party members to lean on and to hold him up and to help him. And so that's where we hit those emotional growth points.
Nice. Brian wants to know, do you have any social situations you recommend throwing PCs in? Are there any standard scenarios that seem to reliably cause entertaining player reactions?
I mean, goblins. Goblins are always fun, I think. Like, that's probably not quite the answer you're looking for, but like, I love goblins and kobolds are so much fun because, sort of as written, right, they're these chaotic, evil, horrible creatures. However, it leaves you really open to do a lot with them. Um, and then they can do unusual things. And so in a therapy game, actually, there was a kobold that was coming in and attacking or going to attack the players, and they kind of felt bad. I decided to describe it as sort of a pathetic looking creature, and they all felt bad for him. And so they decided instead of attacking him, they were going to try to trick him into helping them. And so they minor illusioned an employee of the month badge and told him that he had passed the test. He was doing a really good job, and now he was the employee of the month. And those are moments where, like, I'll have the players roll dice just because I'm going to have them roll, like rolling dice, but also in my head, I'm like, this is amazing. And yes, let's lean into this. And like, I think as a DM, it's not necessarily a specific type of situation that elicits these wonderful social interactions. It's being willing to lean into the weird and improv. I heard this a lot when I started GMing, and like, it is so true. The better your improv chops, the easier it is to GM, and the more you're able to lean into these interesting social situations, because your players are going to do stuff you don't expect. And like, it's really easy for us to be like, no, that doesn't happen because that's not on my paper. And I didn't expect that. So it's like, I'm going to try and befriend the Lich. Okay, tell me how you do this, right? That's where we get those interesting moments where it's bizarre and unexpected. It's not in the book. It's not one of the choices that was anticipated, but let's see what happens.
I've definitely had those groups that have tried to befriend everything.
Mm-hmm.
And I found like the best thing was to let them do it a lot of times. So then when you don't let it happen, it's kind of a surprise. It kind of like really like it gets them. And and it also just creates a lot of really like fun role playing scenarios. And I definitely enjoy a game where the players can outthink the situation instead of like having to outfight it every time.
Yeah.
But yeah, so for the Hex Crawl for the West Marsh style game, so
Mm-hmm.
have you put much thought into that?
I have put a little thought into it. Yeah. Yeah.
So do you have a premise for it?
I do, but I'm not going to say because it involves the climactic end of the current campaign story and what's going to happen there.
Okay. We don't want to give away any spoilers.
Mhm.
So, um, what advice on going back to the kind of the emotional growth points? Like, do you have any tools that we use to kind of dissect your players so that a GM
Mhm.
can kind of use that as a kind of jumping off point?
Well, the first is consent. Like, my players know that I'm doing this, right? And they get a say in how they want their characters to grow. Okay, so like that's the first thing is like, I want to help your character grow emotionally and to mature emotionally. What do you think that would look like for your character? And then they can understand that, they can outline that. And then it's not about shoehorning them into doing it. It's giving them those opportunities, um, and seeing where they go. Like, oh God, another beautiful moment that happened in Clinical Role that I wasn't expecting. Adam Adam Johns and Adam Davis, their characters, Gragnald and Bairden, they, come from this Wolfang clan, and their backstory was their village was destroyed. And they were traveling nearish to where their village was from. And I thought that they would both want to avoid it, that they would not want to go back and visit those memories. Um, but they didn't. They decided to go back. So I was not expecting that as hadn't planned for that, but I trusted my players to take that somewhere and to pay attention to what was going on and to pay attention to what the players were communicating were their vulnerabilities and their difficulties in those moments. Again, in order to have that character growth, that character emotional points, you've got to have the consent and the buy-in from the players. Like, do not do this without their consent. Like, that is manipulative and not a good idea to do. But to have that and to see that and to lean into it when your players give you that opportunity. So, like with these two going back to the village and talking about it, and like got Adam Johns had this line in it that it blew my mind and really choked me up, which was they had a building that they had brought all the bodies into and set on fire. He would had his character in there kind of looking at it and just going, they never tell you how long it takes to collect all the bodies and how difficult it is to drag everyone to one place. And I was just like,
Yeah, the details.
okay,
That's what gets you.
yeah. And it was just amazingly powerful. And so it's this, as a GM, like when our players entrust us with these gifts, NPCs that they love, places that they genuinely care about, like, yes, these are knives that we get to use as GMs that we can cut, but we can also use that to, cut away barriers or to cut into the player. Being a GM who uses every NPC the player cares about as an emotional, like, knife, like, to just to hurt them, that's awful. Like, use those things as growth. Let them save characters. Like, I had an NPC who was designed to sacrifice themselves to save the party, and the party got really attached to them and talked them into saving themselves. And so, like, again, that's all this growth, but I think the biggest lesson I have for you GMs is, like, be willing to change your story. Be willing to adjust things based on what your players want, based on how their characters grow, based on what happens. Be flexible, be open to change, because this isn't your story, it's our story. We are narrating and steering the boat, but they're catching the wind in the sails, they're using the oars. They get a say in the direction that we're going as well.
Yeah, it's super important, and using those NPCs to not only cut at your players but to also help them grow and tell a better story and engage with your world. Plus, we've talked a lot about trust on here today. If you destroy everything that they like, they're not going to trust you, and you're not
Mhm.
going to get buy-in anymore from them.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Yeah, you're gonna end up with, my character is from nowhere. They just came into existence.
yeah.
They have no connections to this world. They have no one they care about, right? It's like, and that's no fun for anybody.
There was like an NPC arc that I kind of like finished off in one of my games where I had two Goblin Entertainer player characters, and they ended up with this patron, this crazy old woman, who like kind of adopted them, and then like after playing probably the character that NPC was around for years, probably in the game, and then I had her just pass away because she was old, and like
Yeah.
and then left everything to the to those players, and then they kind of had to like try and figure out what to do with this stuff, and even like take on the help that she had, and how to like honor that memory, and kind of continue what she was doing and what was important to her. At the same time, it wasn't about just like, oh, I'm going to punish my players by killing this NPC they like, but no, it's like, okay, like how can we grow the story in a different direction now, and how can they
Hmm.
still kind of interact with the memory of that NPC,
Yeah.
and her legacy.
And it's more meaningful then. Like I just finished up a campaign that I play in where some NPCs had passed on, but like it was more meaningful because like we were we all were fighting our level 20 final battle together, and several NPCs that we knew lost their lives, but it was sort of like they redeemed themselves. They did what they wanted to do, and if it not that I don't want to say it felt good that these NPCs that
Yeah.
our characters cared about died, but it felt satisfying. I think it was a satisfying conclusion in that way.
Yeah, and like so that's what like I was going for, like kind of like the conclusion of a real relationship, you know,
Yeah, yeah.
where for someone to just quietly pass because they've lived a life, and
Hmm.
has already had that, instead of just like doing the thing where you're always trying to like use, like you said, use the NPCs as knives or ways to prompt your players. But I felt like, oh, wouldn't it be cool to do that, but in a different way, where it wasn't this terrible thing that happened, but like this actual, like, this is how life goes.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah, and we kind of did that too a little in Clinical Role with Emerald's character, or Dr. B's character Emerald. The his sort of crush as a kid, the kid who convinced him to run away from the orphanage, ended up being the king of thieves in the city. But for them, life hadn't turned out like, even though it was one of those things, they got everything they wanted,
Yeah.
but then you get there and you're like, this was not what I expected, right? And like, I wish I regret. I have regrets, and seeing an NPC with regrets and the like understanding your own regret and how that can work. And again, these are those interesting things where we can really explore deep issues in this safe environment of a game. But again, trust, 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 consent, consent, consent.
Yeah, I mean, the funny thing about D&D and RPGs, they teach us a lot about ourselves and our friends
Hmm.
sometimes, for better or worse. Uh, and I think somebody told me that they either read somewheres, or maybe I read it as well somewheres, is like the experience is the experiences we have when we play these games. It's like we go through them. When we retell the
Yeah.
tales, we talk about what we did, what I did. It's not necessarily the characters. It's almost like we
Hmm.
get to live these things.
Yeah, and that's some research I want to see. I want to see what's happening in the brain when we're recalling D&D memories, because I'm really interested in that. Someone do that, please.
Someone with a lot of money, please do that.
Yes.
Well, as it becomes more prominent, I can only imagine it's a matter of time before we start getting more and more of the research on this stuff. Uh,
Yeah.
as as we're seeing the hobby go more mainstream, it's popping up in our Netflix shows and movies. One of the other GMs that I know that has a YouTube channel told me, like, they were at work having people come up to them asking them about D&D because they had seen it on Netflix, from
Yeah,
Stranger Things. So it's really cool to be going into this golden age.
it is. It's amazing time to be a gamer.
So, uh, do you have any? Will you be taking part in any of the virtual cons, as far as
I'm on some panels for
panels?
PAX. I might be doing something with I am going to be doing something with Bahana Group's Save Against Fear convention. Um, and then I might be doing something with Gamehole Con virtual. I'm not sure yet though. Like my plate is very, very full and I've been
Yeah.
actively trying to take things off of it. But I do so much stuff with Geeks Like Us. We were actually talking about trying to do like roundtable, like panel discussions a few times a month and things. So people follow Geeks Like Us on Twitter. We have a very active Discord. I pop in there and we talk tabletop things and GMing tips and stuff.
Yeah, I asked because I know you were very active in the panel scene.
Yes. Yeah.
So we're coming up on the hour mark. Any final thoughts before we head out?
No, this was an awesome talk. Thank you so much for having me. It was an honor to be here.
Thanks for coming on. I really appreciate it. We'll have to do it again sometime. Not quite so far between.
Yes.
And with that, until next time, stay nerdy.